Worship in France, are The Question of Lucifer, a record of things seen and heard in the secret societies according to the evidence of initiates, by A.E.Waite, and Chapter 12, The Passing of Dr. Bataille. The most obvious line of criticism in connection with the memoirs entitled Le Diable au, I don't know how you're supposed to say 19 Stecle, would be the preposterous, impossible nature of its supernatural narratives. Actually, isn't that the most possible thing? The spirits and all that, but the physical stuff? Well, the supernatural narratives includes, physical mentions. But to attribute a historical veracity to the ventures of Baron Munchausen might scarcely appear more unserious than to accept this recit d'un témoin as evidence for transcendental phenomena. I need scarcely say that I regard this reasoning as so altogether sound and applicable that it is almost unnecessary to develop it. The personal adventures of Dr. Bataille, as regards their supernatural element, are so transparently fabulous that it would be intolerable to regard them from any other point of view. That an ape should speak to Mill is beyond the bounds of possibility. It is impossible also that a female fakir or pythoness, aged 152 years, should allow herself to be consumed in a leisurely manner by fire. It is impossible that any ascetics could have maintained life in their organisms under the loathsome conditions prevailing within the alleged temple at Pondicherry. It is impossible that any person could have survived the ordeal which Dr. Bataille pretends to have suffered at Calcutta, to have relished and even prolonged. It is impossible that the tables and organs should be found suspended from a ceiling at a close of a spiritual seance. It is impossible that the serpent of Sophia Walter should have been elongated in the manner described. When I say that these things are impossible, I am speaking with due regard to the claims of transcendental phenomena, and it is from the transcendental standpoint that I judge them. Genuine transcendental phenomenon may extend the accepted limits of probability, but when alleged transcendental phenomena do violence to all probability, that is the unfailing test of hallucination or untruth on the part of those who dispose to them. Now, there are psychic and spiritual realities that aren't necessarily the same as, hallucination. These things could not have occurred as they are narrated, and Dr. Bataille is exploiting the ignorance of that class of readers to whom his mode of publication appealed. As products of imagination, his marvels are crude and illiterate. In other words, they belong to precisely that type which is characteristic of romances published in penny numbers, and when he pledges his rectitude regarding them, he does not enlist our confidence, but indicates the slight value which he sets on his stake. At the same time, two reasons debar me from laying further stress upon this line of argument. In the first place, we must remember that his unlettered readers have been taught by their religious instructors to believe in the unlimited power of the devil, and they have probably found in the outrageous nature of the narratives a real incentive to accept them. In the second place, my own position as a transcendentalist connects me, less or more, with the acknowledgement of transcendental phenomena, and to distinguish the limits of possibility in these matters would involve a technical discussion for which there is no opportunity here. It is understood, however, that in the interest of transcendental science, I reject the miraculous element in Dr. Bataille's memoirs. And, if you focus on reality, it helps you to distinguish stuff like this. Another line of criticism, also open and leading to convincing results, would dwell upon the glaring improbability of the entire story outside that miraculous element. There is no colorable pretense of likelihood, for example, in the connection instituted between Fakirs and Freemasons, or between secret societies in China and a sect of Luciferians in Charleston. But the partisans of Dr. Bataille are prepared to believe anything of Masonry, and dismiss likelihood as they would dismiss impossibility. Some arguments, unassailable on account of their stupidity, and of such shelter I intend to deprive my witness. I shall therefore merely register my recognition that this criticism does obtain completely. For much the same reason, I shall only refer in passing to another matter, which in itself is sufficient to remove these memoirs from the region of actuality. They bristle with the kind of coincidences which are the common convenience of bad novelists to create or escape situations, and are rejected even by legitimate fiction, because they are untrue to life. At the present time, the device of coincidence is left to true monopolists. The Society for Psychical Research and the manufacturers of the penny dreadful. Unreasonable demands are, however, made upon it by Dr. Bataille. Never in an awkward predicament does the coincidence fail to help him. Wheresoever he goes, it times his arrival rightly to witness some occasional and rare event, and it places him at once in communion with the indispensable person whose presence was antecedently unlikely. The very existence of his memoirs would have been jeopardized had the Anadyr reached Point de Galle immediately before instead of immediately after the catastrophe, which converted Corbuccia at the beginning of his mission against Masonry. Coincidence arranged the last illness of the Senegalese Pythoness to the exigencies of his date of arrival. It brought John Kemble to Pondicherry, Phileas Walter to Calcutta. At Singapore, it fixed a Palladic institution in the grade of Templar mistress to correspond with his flying visit on the road to Shanghai. Now all these coincidences are of the class which come off in fiction and miss it in the combinations of real life, but to insist on this point would not disillusionize the believers in Dr. Bataille, who will say that he was assisted by Providence. We must show that he has deceived them in matters which admit of verification. Over certain points of ordinary fact which can be placed beyond the region of dispute, and by which the truth of his narrative may be held to stand or fall. I shall confine myself for this purpose to what he states at first hand in his capacity as an eyewitness, and to two salient cases which may be taken to represent the whole. Among the rest, some are in course of investigation, and so far as they have gone, are promising similar results. The locality of others has been so chosen as to baffle inquiry, and in one or two instances I have failed to obtain results. It is obviously impossible to prove that there is not a native hut in a thick, impassable forest at an unindicated distance from Point de Galle, or that this hut does not possess a vast subterranean chamber. When we cannot check our witness, we must regard what he tells us in the light of those instances which it is possible to fix firmly. Among negative results, I may mention as an inquiry into the alleged death of a person named George Shackleton in a Masonic lodge at Calcutta, Sir John Lambert, KCSIE, the commissioner of police at that place, very courteously made investigations at my suggestion, first at the coroner's court, but the records for the year 1880 are not now in existence, and secondly, 16 years later, that's maybe not something that should be. And secondly, among the oldest police officers, but also without result, I applied thereupon to Dr. Robert William Shackleton, Q.C., J.P., inquiring whether any relative of his family had died under curious circumstances at Calcutta or about the year 1880. His answer is this: I never heard of anything about the death of a George Shackleton in Calcutta. My elder and younger brother were both living in Calcutta, and if any person of the same name had been living there, I should have heard of it from them. My younger brother, Alexander Shackleton, died at Madras on his way home with his wife and children of confluent smallpox. My eldest brother, Joseph, is still alive. The presumption, therefore, is that Corbuccia's story of the strange fatality which occurred in his presence at a Masonic lodge is without any foundation in fact, but I regard the result as negative because it falls short of demonstration. I am now setting other channels in operation, but it is not a test case, and not an event which Dr. Bataille claims to have witnessed himself. It is unnecessary to await the issue. If the reader will now glance at several occasions of the 6th chapter, he will find that one of the most important is that titled The Seven Temples and a Sabbath in Sheol, where Dr. Bataille tells us that he witnessed unheard of operations in black magic on the part of Palladian masons and diabolizing fakirs. You do have fakirs that worship other than God, but Sufi mendicants. Okay, there are, certain orders that would be called that, but this is just, so the locality was a plain called Dapa, 2 hours' drive from Calcutta. The particulars which are given concerning the edifices on the mountain of granite, but more especially concerning an open charnel, where the dead bodies of innumerable human beings mixed indiscriminately with those of animals, and with the town refuse, are left to rot under the eye of heaven, will not impress anyone, however unacquainted with India, and with the vicinity of the English capital and seat of government, as wearing many of the features of probability. The facts are as follows. A place called Dapanapur, and for brevity, Dapa, does exist in the neighborhood of Calcutta, and thereto the town refuse is actually carried by a special line of railway. There is no granite mountain, and there are no temples, while so far from it being a charnel into which human bodies are flung, are a place where the adepts of the Palladium could celebrate a black Sabbath and form a magical chain with putrid corpses. It is a great lake covering an area of 30 square miles, and is known by Anglo-Indians as the Saltwater Lake. In the year of 1886, it was in course of reclamation, but all that, Dr. Bataille tells us, is specifically untrue, and he could never have witnessed there the things which he describes as taking place in the year 1880. The récit d'un témoin is in this matter an invented history. As a consequence of the bogus experience in Calcutta, Dr. Bataille pretends to have been admitted within the charmed circle of the new and reformed Palladium, and there was therefore qualified to be present at the initiation of a Templar mistress, which took place not long after at Singapore. His account of this initiation turns upon 2 or 3 points which do not appear in the synopsis of the 6th chapter. One of these is the existence of a Kadosh Areopagite of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, but at least at the period in question there was no such Areopagite, and the Scottish Rite did not exist at Singapore. The sole Masonic institution was a district Grand Lodge of the ancient free and accepted Masons of England in the Eastern Archipelago, working under the warrant of the English Grand Lodge, holding half-yearly communications and special meetings when the district Grand Master deemed necessary. Its patent dates from March 3rd, 1878, and the district Grand Master at the time was Hon William H. MacLeod Reid. 3 lodges worked under its jurisdiction, 2 of which were at Singapore and 1 at Penang, and to one of the former a Royal Arch chapter was attached. It is needless to say that our author's Misraim diploma would have obtained his admission to none, and there is no person here in England who would have had the effrontery to affirm that he might have fared better by reason of his Palladian degree. It is sufficient, however, to state that there was no lodge of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in Singapore at the time of his visit. But the imposition does not end there. Dr. Bataille does not merely describe what took place at a lodge, which was not in existence. He gives particulars of an address delivered by a certain Dr. Murray at a meeting attended by himself. Now, at the date in question, there was no such person, either in the town, in its vicinity, or in Penang. There's, fortunately, an institution among us which is termed the British Museum, and it enables us to verify questions of this kind. Furthermore, when describing the Palladian meeting at the Presbyterian chapel, there was such a chapel, by the way. He tells us that the Grand Master was named Spencer, and that he was a cognizant of Singapore, but there was again no such person in the town or its vicinity at the time, and so his entire narrative, with its ritual reproduced from Leo Taxil, is demolished completely. I submit that these 2 incidences are sufficient to indicate the kind of man with whom we are dealing. Best case, he's a schizophrenic, but probably a liar. It may be a matter of astonishment to my readers that a work of even the position should be performed so clumsily as to portray itself at once to a little easy research, but it must be remembered that the class of French readers to whom Dr. Bataille made appeal are so ignorant of all which concerns the English that skill is not required to exploit them, and it is enough that the English are abused. Of our author's qualifications in this respect, I have already given some specimens, but they convey no idea of his actual resources in the matter of abuse and calumny. A direct quotation will not be beside the purpose in this place. Wheresoever religious influence can make itself felt, there the wife and maid are the purest, the most ingenuous expression of the creation and the divinely touching idea synthesized by the Immaculate Mother of Christ, the Virgin Mary. But on the contrary, in England, and still more especially in the English colonies, under the pernicious influence of the Protestant heresy engendered by revolts of truly diabolical inspiration, the wife and maid are in some sort the opprobrium of humanity. The example, moreover, comes from an exalted place. As is known, the whole world is acquainted with that which John Bull does not himself confess, namely, the private history of her whom the Indians term the Old Lady of London, given over to vice and drunkenness from her youth, Her Majesty Whiskey the First. I've made this quotation because it gives the opportunity to dispense with the civility of discussion, which is exercised by one generation towards another. but would be out of place on the part of a gentleman who is giving a deserved castigation to a disgusting and foul-mouthed rascal. That is the nameless refuge which flings itself to bespatter masonry. Down, unclean dog, and back, scavenger to your offal. The scullion in the Queen's kitchen would, I think, disdain to whip you. Setting aside these scandalous slanders and recurring to the subject in hand, it is clear that when a writer who comes forward with a budget of surprising revelations is shown to have invented his materials in certain single incidences, it becomes superfluous to subject his entire testimony to a laborious sifting, and there is really no excuse to delay much longer over the memoirs of Dr. Bataille. It would be needless to state that my researches have failed to discover at such dismantled temple as that described at Pondicherry and affirmed to be on the English soil adjacent to the French town, it is equally unnecessary to say that the story of the caves of Gibraltar is a gross and absurd imposture, for in fact it betrays itself. Parisian literature of the byways has its own methods, and its purveyors are shrewd enough to know what will be tolerated and what will be enjoyed by their particular class of patrons. Transcendental toxicology and an industry in idols, worked by criminals intercommunicating by means of volapük, may be left to them. Nor is it intended to do more than touch lightly upon a pleasant process in piracy by which Dr. Bataille lightens the toils of authorship. He has done better than any other among the witnesses of Lucifer in his gleanings from Eliphas Levi. On page 32 of his first volume, there is a brazen theft concerning the chemistry of black magic, and there is another, a little less daring, on page 67, being a description of a Baphometic idol. It goes without saying that the conjuration of the four is important, as others have imported it, from the ritual de la haute magie. Magi. The vesture of the master of ceremonies, which officiated in the sanctuary of the Phoenix, one of the mythical temples, the Dapa, is a property derived from the same quarter. So in like manner is part of a magical adjuration in the account of a Sabbath in Sheol. Finally, a method of divination described in the latter place, volume 1, page 343, 344, will be found in Christian's Histoire de la Magie. And let me remind you that Baphomet, the multi-creatured androgen figure, I believe, based on experience, that there is a whole species of such entities, and this belief is not knowledge, because meeting one such creature and seeing some of the references as metaphoric because of the, it's like that, but that's not really what it is, so the idea that other Eliphas Levi and some other, and those before him, were the first people to speak of such an entity, I don't believe so. Pan, as would be said in some instances, the artist who has illustrated the memoirs has acted after the same manner. The two Baphometic figures, volume 1, page 9 and 89, are reproductions from Levi's plates. The Sabbatic figure, same source, page 153, is a modification from Christian. The original idea of the shadow demon on page On page 209, we found in Levi's sacerdotal hand making the sign of esotericism. The four figures of the Palladian urn on page 313 are plagiarized in a similar way. The illustration on page 337, which purports to be a Gnostic symbol of the dual divinity, is actually the frontispiece to Levi's Dogme de la Haute Magie. The magic urn on page 409 is the facsimile of a similar object in another of Levi's drawings, and if it were worthwhile to continue, the material for a further enumeration is not wanting. But these matters, after all, are of inferior moment, and to complete the exposure of this witness, I pass to the final points of my criticism. Dr. Bataille publishes an alleged table of high-grade masonry as it existed on March 1st, 1891, and in this document, which is similar in many respects to another of a slightly anterior date produced by Signor Margiotta, is said to have been prepared by Albert Pike himself, which includes a long list of the persons then in correspondence with the Supreme Dogmatic Directory as Inspectors General in permanent mission. It is a bizarre medley which includes the orders of the Druids, Mopsuses, Oddfellows, and Mormon Moabites in the same connection as the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and the rites of Memphis and Mizraim, and the Son Ho Hai. As such, it would be in any case a large tax upon the gullibility of readers outside the back streets of Paris, but I determined to make some inquiries. Among the English names mentioned, for example, Mr. R. W. Shackleton, to whom I have already referred, is said at the period in question to have been in official correspondence with the Dogmatic Directory, representing the special relations of Ireland, and having drawn his attention to the point, he has furnished me with the following contradiction. The statement in your letter, taken from the book you refer to, that I was in the year 91 in direct correspondence with the Supreme Dogmatic Directory of Charleston is utterly false. I never even heard of any such body as the Supreme Directory, or of what is called the New and Reformed Palladium. The only communication I ever had with General Albert Pike, whom I had never seen, was in reference to a question of Masonic procedure in America. So far as I am aware, the existence of either of the bodies referred to is unknown to any of the Masonic body in Ireland, and I can, with almost certainty, make the same statement in reference to the English and Scottish Masons. Having been for nearly 27 years the acting head of the order in Ireland, I can speak with authority, and you are at liberty, in my name, to give the most emphatic contradiction to the statements quoted from the book. So far as I am aware, General Pike was never anything more than sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of the 33rd Southern Jurisdiction of America. The case of Mr. John Yarker, Grand Master of the Memphis Rite in England, I have already had occasion to mention, and have cited his explicit denial of any acquaintance with the New and Reformed Palladium, but he's included by Dr. Bataille in his wonderful enumeration. Upon the general question, Mr. Yarker observes that the Scottish or ancient accepted rite has nothing occult about it, but the Memphis Mizraim rites are wholly occultism. That Pike has, however, in his lectures added occult materials from these occult rites. That Pike is a very able man, ruled the whole of the Supreme Grand Councils of the 33rd degree, ancient and accepted, which almost all originated from Charleston. That is to say, that is the only form in which there can be said to have been a dogmatic directorate. Well, from what, North Carolina down on south, it's quite a domain of your authority as a societal overseer. Well, I mean, the Freemasons don't per se rule society like people think they do. They have produced presidents and stuff, but if you're looking for an order that underlies the rulership of the world, you might be best to look elsewhere, at certain billionaires that control trillions of dollars of resources and some other stuff like that. In like manner, Mr. William Officer of Edinburgh, an initiate of the Scottish Rite, Inspector General of the Supreme Council of the French Orient, and Hahn, member of its Grand College of Rites, denies his alleged connection with any central directory, and has heard of nothing of such an institution. I do not conceive that there is any call to fill space by the multiplication of these denials, and I need therefore only add that I have others equally explicit in my possession. The obvious conclusion is that the alleged table of high-grade masonry is a bogus document founded on some official list of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. Lastly, there are certain statements made by Dr. Bataille which warrants the presumption that he could have had little, if any, active acquaintance with the Memphis Rite, that he may have purchased a diploma from Pacina is probably enough. What I learn of the Grand Master of the Neapolitan Sovereign Sanctuary, through sources not tainted like those of the witnesses of Lucifer, does not place him wholly above financial considerations. But Pacina was, and is, totally unrecognized by any Masonic power in the world of craft masonry. So far, therefore, from such a diploma acting as an open sesame, it would have sealed all doors against its owner, and the statement is true not only for ordinary craft masonry, but for the great majority of lodges under the Mizraim obedience. Dr. Bataille would not, therefore, have had much opportunity for participating in the rite, which he has purchased interests, and as a fact, he is wholly ignorant concerning it. For example, he seems to represent the Memphis and Mizraim rites as enjoying recognition from the Scottish Rite, and the latter as consciously subordinate and inferior, whereas the position is this: Memphis recognizes the 33rd degree of the ancient accepted rite as its first steps, and places 62 degrees upon them, which are not recognized in return. Mizraim also includes the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, but in a more regular arrangement, other degrees being interspersed among them.